The plane was attacked by a bird 2 minutes after takeoff. Both engines shut down. There was no other way out. Captain Sully decided to make a forced landing on the Hudson River.
Portrait control, we can make it. We're turning back towards LaGuardia.
155 people miraculously survived. The press is hailing him as a hero. But Sully, who returned, was suspended. It turns out that the National Security and Transportation Agency has launched an investigation into the accident. They decided that landing in the Hudson River was not the only option. Another airport would have been a safer bet. At night, Sully had trouble sleeping in his hotel. He called his deputy, Smith, who was also under investigation. The two men discussed recent events. They both looked forward to returning to work. After a few days, Sully was invited to a prestigious show. Backstage, while he was getting ready, a female crew member suddenly dropped a kiss on the man's cheek. It turned out to be the woman's mother, grateful for Sally's kindness. But Sully turned her down. The reason was that he already had a wife. This story tells us, a man must be able to resist temptation. Know how to refuse. Sully looked at the building across the street. He had a vision of an airplane crashing into it. Until someone behind him kept yelling, he came to his senses. The man had some bad news. It turns out that the latest data shows that the left engine has been running, though Sully said it didn't match what he'd sensed. But the man told him that the committee had been informed. Sully and Smith were questioned again by the committee. Smith was getting out of control. He was agitated and refuted.
Part you don't like. You're not used to having answers to.
Sully stepped forward to clear the air, but the committee won't relent. They were convinced, based on the simulations. The committee was convinced, based on the simulations. They were convinced that landing at the airport was the best option. Sully wants the left-hand dynamo to prove himself, but he was told that it was nowhere to be found. Sully went back to the hotel, not knowing what to do. But then he got a call from his wife. It turned out that their land could not be rented for 9 months. They're in financial trouble. This story tells us, for the sake of safety, you need to be very careful when flying. When the plane took off, it encountered a flock of birds. After the bird strike, the captain discovered that both engines had failed. The cabin was plunged into darkness. The flight attendants got up to reassure the passengers. Captain Sully activated the auxiliary power system and reported the situation to the tower.
Hey, Mayday, this is Cactus 1549.
We hit birds.
The tower responded immediately. Clear runway 13 for landing. But Captain Sully decided to make a forced landing on the Hudson River. The tower crew searched for a closer landing site, but they found that the other side was no longer responding. At this point, Captain Sully alerted the passengers to prepare for an emergency landing. And then the radar signal disappeared. The tower activated nearby planes, only to learn that they were about to crash. Fortunately, Captain Sully was able to maneuver the plane. The plane stayed firmly in the river. But soon the river was coming in from all directions. The captain and crew organized the passengers to get off the plane. Rescue teams soon arrived. And Captain Sully made a final check that the plane was clear before choosing to leave. This story tells us, for the greater good, we can improvise when we have to. When Sully arrived, then he came to the harbor. He wanted to do a head count. The rescue police stopped him.
Jeff's right. Let's get you in some dry clothes before you freeze.
Because he was soaking wet, Sully had to give up for a while. He rested at the hotel with Smith. A coworker brought the hotel staff to meet them. Sully said he wanted his uniform dry cleaned. The staff was happy to oblige, and gave him a hug. The colleague also told him the good news. After counting, all 155 people are safe. Memories are over. Sully was watching a report on the incident. He was suddenly inspired. The hearing was fast approaching. Sully and Smith arrived. With the crowd watching, the committee used a real-life simulation. But the simulation showed that they could have followed the tower's instructions. They could have landed safely at Airport 13. This story tells us, sometimes, you can't help but be wronged. Captain Sully, on the other hand, said calmly. He said, "We're ignoring the human factor." The pilot's reaction was nothing like a real person's. In the face of his rebuttal, the committee denied it. Sully continued to argue his case.
These pilots were not behaving like human beings.
He asked the committee how many training sessions it took to get to this point. The committee told him it was 17. The room erupts. So the committee compromised. A time limit of 35 seconds was set. Neither of the two crews on display made it. The phone records were later released, showing that Sully did consider other possibilities, but the condition of the plane was not suitable. The two men recalled what happened. They had to go out and adjust. The hearing continues. The left engine was also found, proving that Captain Sully's judgment was correct. Eventually, the commissioners changed their tune. Sully and Smith returned to work. This is the story of a man who was wrongly accused. When you've been wronged, we must learn to prove ourselves.